Assalamu alaikum, sisters, and welcome to 3 Steps to Healing Childhood Trauma. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I keep feeling angry? Why do I keep repeating those patterns? Why is it that I struggle to get close to other people? What's wrong with me? Why do I get so angry so easily? Why am I so triggered? Sisters, I would like to share with you information about childhood trauma and how it impacts us in our adult life, and how these patterns and our formative experiences have shaped who we are today. So my name is Nadia Akhtar. I'm a mental health professional and a counsellor in training at the moment. I've been working as a life coach for the past 4 to 5 years, helping sisters who've been recently divorced, helping sisters who are struggling in their marriages. I've been supporting teenagers in secondary schools at the moment, and I've also worked with teenagers in a life coach capacity as well through private when sisters contact me privately. So alhamdulillah, I have quite a lot of experience, and also through my counselling training I am learning so much more about psychodynamic counselling, and I really feel as though I've got a real strong passion towards this work and how our formative experiences do impact us in our life and who we become. In terms of my family life, um, my mum had disabled children in my formative experiences. As soon as I was born, I already had 3 sisters who had disabilities, and my mum had experienced the grief of her first child who'd passed away when he was 4 years old. Later on in secondary school age, I had a younger brother called Hassan, and he had a long-term disability, mental and physical disability, and sadly, we lost him when he was 11 years old. Throughout my life, I've seen my mum struggle with her trauma of losing her children, how it's impacted her and her ability to nurture, support, and love her children. And also, going into motherhood myself, I noticed how I carried some of these sadnesses with me and some of those experiences in the way that the patterns that I subconsciously absorbed from my mum into my own parenting with my own children. And this led me to start searching frantically every single parenting book that I could get my hands on. It's just 1 or 2 years into my journey in motherhood, I noticed that I had so much impatience towards my daughter. I would get very triggered by certain things, and I just wondered what was it that was making me feel so unhappy. I mean, after all, this was something that I deeply wanted, and was loving as well at the same time. But there was just this sort of like pull and push inside me that I could never work out what it was. So I really invested a lot of money and time and energy into my healing, my educating myself and learning about myself. And Alhamdulillah, it is helping and paying off 100,000-fold in my family life, my relationship with my husband, with my children, with my siblings, with my parents. Alhamdulillah. And I feel as though, sisters, I'd like to share some of the things I've learned and I found really helpful with yourselves in the quest and my intention is to be able to help you and support you and to be able to give something to you, and maybe it will help you inshallah in some way too. So let's get started, sisters. The plan for the next half an hour or so, and inshallah hope to wrap things up in half an hour, is to share with you what trauma is, specifically childhood emotional neglect. I think that's one that often gets pushed under the carpet, and maybe some people think it's quite normal. I want to give you some examples of childhood emotional neglect, the effects of childhood emotional neglect, um, some quick science about how trauma and this type of trauma impacts the brain. I want to talk a bit about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. I think this is really, really helpful. Just having this basic understanding of these things can help us so much with our self-awareness and understanding ourselves. And then finally, I'll share the 3 core emotional needs with you and how you can start working on them in order to be able to heal and to be able to grow and evolve, inshallah. So, the 3 steps to healing childhood trauma. Before I even make a start, I want to just ask you a few questions, sisters. Do you ever find yourself feeling super triggered and to such an extent that you can't control your emotions? Do you struggle to express yourself and process your feelings? Do you find yourself trying to people please and trying to help everyone and fix everybody's problems and trying to be a hero in your family life? Or do you struggle with perfectionism, like everything has to be perfect and you have to look perfect to everybody else? Are you fiercely independent and so independent that you will not ask anybody for help, even if you're really, really struggling? Do you judge yourself harshly, even though you've done your best? You're never really happy with what you've done. Do you have a hard time trusting other people and making relationships with them? Do you struggle with unexplained pain in your body? And do you feel unsafe in the world? Just a few things for you to reflect on, sisters, because these are some of the things that do impact people who have struggled with childhood emotional neglect. But let's go on to talk about what exactly is trauma, sisters. So, trauma is a response to an intensely stressful event or situation. Now, when we often think about trauma, we think about like very traumatic situations, which is called big T trauma. We often think about people who have survived war. We think about somebody who has been in natural disaster, somebody who's been the victim of a violent crime, or we think about somebody whose parents have passed away, or somebody who's been exposed to a physical or sexual violence. So this is called the one that we often think about is called a big T trauma. This is when a singular traumatic event impacts somebody so intensely that their nervous system isn't able to cope with that trauma. So this is called a big T trauma. There's something else, sisters, called a little T trauma, and this is a little T trauma is an ongoing, emotionally distressing experience that continues for long periods of time. So this could be things like adverse childhood experiences. It could be things like emotional neglect, accidents. It could be like a hospital treatment, an ongoing hospital treatment, or children who are going through dental treatment or treatment for cancer or any other kind of illness. It can be things like being yelled at in childhood, constantly being yelled at by your parents or caregivers or teachers, being made fun of or humiliated in school. If you've been bullied at school, it can be something that, if it's ongoing and is constantly emotionally distressing for you, and you wasn't able to manage that, that can be considered a little T trauma. It can be physical and sexual abuse that are ongoing, and also a parent's divorce can impact children in this way as well. So it's just useful to know that trauma isn't always the big traumas that we often think of. There is something called little T trauma and big T trauma. Now, of course, we would maybe think that big traumas are more serious or they impact a person more, and little T trauma doesn't impact a person so much. But this is incorrect. Both types of traumas can impact people in exactly the same way. The trauma of a little T trauma, because it's so ongoing, can impact a person's habits, patterns, the way they deal with things, their relationships, the way they show up in life in general. So just a bit of information about what a trauma is, how a trauma can impact us, and like even if it's a big T trauma or a little T trauma, they are basically can impact a person in just the same way. And also another thing to remember is it isn't about what actually happened, it's about how it impacts the person. So somebody could have hospital treatment, but it may not impact that person, so they may not experience it as a trauma. But for some other child, maybe a hospital treatment can be very traumatizing. It's all to do with individuals and how that experience impacts them. So, the one that I want to speak about today and I want to focus on specifically is childhood emotional neglect. So, what is childhood emotional neglect? This is when a parent or a caregiver consistently fails to meet a child's emotional needs. So, emotional needs, as in the absence of nurturing interactions, connection, when a child's in distress and they're not supported and responded to in a loving way. And this is ongoing. So, this child grows up feeling unloved, unnoticed, unseen. They grow up feeling that as though they're not important, they don't matter. Um, Sisters, the very early connections with our parents and caregivers shape how we see the world and the way we relate to each other. After all, the relationships that we have with our parents are one of the very first relationships that we've ever known in the world. We've not known anybody else. We've not had a relationship with anybody else. The only relationship we have as babies and as small children, and the very first relationship that we have, is the relationship that we have with our mom and dad or our caregivers. And this really shapes our brain and how it starts to form what a relationship is, how we attach to other people. It impacts so much about the way that we see the world, the way that we perceive the world, and our thoughts about how safe we are in the world as well. And this part of our life, this formative experience of our life in counseling, is called psychodynamic counseling, and heavily shapes how we show up in our marriages, as parents ourselves, but in our work environment, with our friends. It heavily, heavily impacts who we are, how we show up. It's almost like a colored pair of sunglasses. When you look through those glasses, that is the color that you see the world in. So that's how heavily parents and caregivers who raise a child can impact their child and what their adult life turns out to be like. Not only adult life, but also during their teens and even while they are children as well. So let me give you some examples of childhood emotional neglect. And I want you to think, sisters, as I'm going through this list, just reflect on whether you can relate to any of these feelings as you were growing up yourself. So although we do have our children today, I want you to cast your mind back to yourself as a child. Can you relate to, or can you resonate with any of these things that I'm sharing? So examples of childhood emotional neglect are ignoring emotional needs. So when say for example, if you're crying or if you're very upset or if you're a bit reserved, did your parents ever notice that you were crying or you were reserved or you were not talking so much? Did they notice your emotional needs, like if you needed a hug or if you needed your back rubbing before you went to bed, or was this kind of emotional needs a thing in your family home? Withholding affection, when parents aren't giving their children affection and love and care, although they say they love their child, does the child really feel loved? This isn't about just saying to your child that you are loved and we love you. The child needs to actually feel it in their heart and in their body that they are loved by their parents. Lack of validation. So when your child talks about something, or when you talked about something as in your childhood, did your parents validate your emotions? So if you were sad, did they say it's okay for you to be sad? When you were crying, did they say it's okay for you to cry and let you have a cry? Or did they say, look, you shouldn't cry, or you shouldn't be sad, or why are you laughing so much? You shouldn't be laughing so much. Or if you found something funny, or if you found something silly, or if you was asking some questions, were your emotions validated? Did your parents listen to you, or were you dismissed and ignored as a child? Or did they even speak to you at all, or was you told to just go outside in the garden and play? Did your parents minimize your achievement when you were younger and thought, okay, look, you've got a B in this subject, or you've got a C, no, you must do better. Although you may have worked very, very hard to get that grade, but your parents only focused on the things that you hadn't done right. Emotional unavailability. Did you experience that your parents were so busy in their own life and on their own jobs that often they were never around for you? It was more about the practical element of getting you changed, giving you food, getting you in bed on time, giving you all of the comforts of life, but maybe the emotional element was missing. Did you experience inconsistency in their emotional responses? Like sometimes they would be very laid back about things, and sometimes they were very explosive and very angry and very irritated. But that was quite confusing for you as a child. Did you ever experience being treated like an emotional burden? Like, did you ever experience your parents feel as though that, doing something for you or doing your tasks and things for you was such a big responsibility for them? Did you ever feel isolated and lonely as a child? Um, did you get guidance and boundaries and all of this explained to you from your parents as you were growing up? So did your parents used to speak to you about life lessons, about things you should, things are good for you to know? Guidance on how to live your life and how to interact with other people, and boundaries about like saying yes and no. Were you ever taught these things by your parents? Did they ever give you this kind of guidance and advice? And the most important question, sisters, is did you feel loved in your childhood? And I'm not talking about just love as in they say they love you, but did you actually feel in your heart and in your body that your parents really love you? So the impacts and the effects of childhood emotional neglect for children who've experienced this in their childhood is that they grow up to become adults who ignore their own emotional needs. They have difficulty receiving affection from other people. They look for validation from others. They don't listen to their own feelings and thoughts. So rather than listening to their feelings and thoughts and sitting with them, they are dismissing and ignoring them. So when they don't feel good, the first thing they would be likely to do is get on the phone and start scrolling, or go and grab something to eat, or get on the phone to somebody, or maybe start shopping online or something, to do something to ignore this negative feeling that they're feeling, because they're just not used to space being given to these feelings in their childhood, and they've grown up with this pattern of whenever I feel anything negative, I just need to shut it down, ignore it, or avoid it in some way or another. They are usually perfectionists or people pleasers. Perfectionists as in they always need to show themselves to be this perfect person who does everything perfectly, has everything all together, their life's all perfect. And they also want to help everyone, solve everyone's problems, come to people's safety, keep everybody happy with them, and go out of their way, really go out of their way to keep people happy with them, due to their lack of, wanting to lose these relationships or experiencing rejection. These are trauma responses of the experiences they had in childhood. So people have been through this childhood emotional neglect are not really aware of their own feelings, and they're not really very good at expressing their feelings. And when they do express them, it may just be an explosive emotional response because they've held everything in for so long that, it's just building up over time. They struggle with their own children's negative emotions. So if their child is crying or unhappy or depressed or has anxiety, this parent won't be able to support their children because the parents know how to support their child. They've never experienced what it was like to sit with someone when they're sad. They either want to fix the problem and say, okay, come on, let me give you what you want so that the child is now happy, or it stops crying or doesn't feel sad, or they want to somehow just kind of like get the child to quickly get over this feeling that they're feeling, because they just don't know how to sit with somebody's negative emotions, how to sit with someone when they're sad, when they're unhappy, when they're disappointed, when they're anxious. How do you feel? How do they do that when they haven't experienced that themselves? These people have inconsistency, and they struggle with working towards their vision. So they have difficulty with staying consistent with their goals or whatever they're working on. Because when you are working on a goal, sisters, it doesn't always feel nice. For example, working on a project doesn't feel nice, going to the gym doesn't feel nice because it doesn't actually feel nice. Working on goals means that we have to be okay with experiencing a certain degree of discomfort. So they use their technique and emotional response, and this coping technique that they have, which is avoidance and distraction of that negative feeling. So they're never really able to reach their goals because they're always avoiding it in order to feel comfortable again. They're not happy with or they're not comfortable with sitting with negative emotions. So some of the effects, and some of these are some of the effects and some of the coping mechanisms that people who have experienced childhood emotional neglect will experience in their life. There may be more as well, but just to give you a little bit of idea of the kind of effects of this in adult life. So, sisters, just like we've got physical needs in life, like we have a need for water, food, we need to defecate. We have all sorts of emotional needs, keep warm. We need water, we need oxygen. Just that we have physical needs for our body, physiologically, our body has certain needs. We have emotional needs. And if these core emotional needs are met effectively, we grow up and develop to our maximum potential. But when these core emotional needs are not met, we develop unhealthy patterns and behaviors to compensate for those needs that we didn't get. So whether parents are consciously or unconsciously or unintentionally neglecting their children emotionally, it will lead to difficulties in them developing healthy relationships later on in life. It will lead to them not being able to express their feelings, and it can cause mental health issues for children when they grow up. And maybe even for ourselves, as we've grown up without our emotional needs being met, maybe we have picked up some unhealthy coping mechanisms that we used in childhood and they worked for us then. And we learned how to cope at that time, but maybe now in our life as adults, as married, being married and having children and having other family members like our in-laws and our circles increased now as we've grown older, maybe those coping mechanisms don't help us today. And maybe if we're aware of them and we understand where they come from, maybe we can work on those things. So, sisters, one thing I just want to say here, just to be clear, is that if you can relate to any of the things I've shared, it doesn't mean that our parents didn't love us or they didn't care about us or we weren't important to them or, it doesn't mean anything like that. Parents emotionally neglect their children because they're uncomfortable with emotions themselves and they're unsure about how to respond to the complex feelings of a child's experience, how to respond to a child's experiences. So these parents may be overwhelmed with their own life and stress. So think about your own mum and dad in your childhood. Maybe they were so overwhelmed with the stress of their own life that they didn't have the capacity to be able to support you as a child or to be able to give you this. Maybe they didn't know about all of this. Maybe their parents had raised them in this way and they were just doing things in the same way again, just repeating the cycle that they'd lived through, now just regurgitating the same sort of experiences again. Maybe they were struggling with work-life balance. Maybe they had marital problems and, maybe when they were married and, the first few children, bringing children up is tough work, isn't it? So maybe they were struggling between themselves. Maybe they had financial issues. Maybe they had, children that had special needs. Maybe they had children with disabilities or like with my parents, they had a lot of pressure on themselves from other things in their life, like having my sisters who are disabled. And maybe that impacts a mom's mental health who wasn't expecting to have children who had disabilities. There could be many different reasons why parents are unable to emotionally support their children in childhood. Maybe it just wasn't a thing at that time that, the children, they just grow up, you give them food, clothes, whatever the basic needs are, give them those things and they grow up. And maybe this just wasn't a thing at that time. Also, I want to say that parents who experienced abuse or emotional neglect themselves may be more likely to neglect their own children. So, sisters, I just want to explain just a little bit of science here. I don't want to go into too much detail because I'm not like the best at science myself. I'm not trained in sciences or anything, but I think knowing this information and learning this has been so helpful for me. And I think that, inshallah, if you just understand this little bit of information that I'm about to give to you, it will really massively help the way that you see yourself and understand yourself as well. So this is our brain, a beautiful brain, subhanallah, subhanallah, such an amazing creation of Allah. Like, this is such a invaluable piece of machinery that Allah has given to us, and it's just subhanallah amazing. And scientists have never really been able to work out fully how this works. So subhanallah, it's amazing. But I just want you to pay attention to two areas on this brain, right? So firstly, can you see in the middle the yellow part that's called the yellow bit? That's called the limbic system. And this part in the middle is responsible for handling our emotions, handling our survival instincts, and our automatic reactions. So, primary function, handling emotions. So, fear, anger, sadness, disappointment, happiness, joy, those kind of emotions. Survival instincts is it keeps us safe, basically. This is this yellow part of the brain, the limbic system, is responsible for keeping us safe. That is one of the very main purposes of the brain, is to keep us safe, to help us survive, basically, to get away from danger and threats and just to keep us alive. That's one of the first purposes of the brain, is just to keep us alive. And then also the limbic part looks after like the automatic reactions like sneezing, coughing, reflex actions, like say if you touch something that's really hot, your hand will quickly move away. It's those kind of things. So I wrote at the bottom, key area amygdala, detecting threat, triggering a body response, so pulling your hand off a hot stove, fear conditioning. So for example, if you've been in a car accident, a really serious car accident, it will condition you to that fear. So this part of your brain will help you, let's say, save you from getting into that situation again. So it conditions fear responses, processing of positive emotions, and encoding emotional memories as well. So that's the amygdala. So remember that one, sisters, because that's important, because I'll be talking about that to you in a minute. The second part of the brain that I want you to remember is called the rational brain, and this is the prefrontal cortex. So this starts around about here, forehead, and just about the front part of our brain, just here. So this is sometimes called the executive functioning part of the brain. So I've made a bit of a mistake there. It says higher thinking, but I meant higher thinking part of our brain this is. So this part is responsible for planning, analyzing, problem solving, decision making, and it provides a full perspective of the situation. Whatever the situation may be, we can think more deeply and try and look at things from both points of view. We can think like, why would somebody have done something in that way? This is like a higher sort of thinking. So other animals will have this other limbic part of their brain, like birds, cats, dogs, elephants, horses. They have this limbic part. But subhanAllah, we are the only creation who have as far as I know, sisters, a prefrontal cortex and this higher functioning part of our brain. This is something that is just for like human beings. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us the Ashraf al-Mukhluqat, the highest form of creation, because we have the ability to be able to understand something. We can have empathy for one another. We can have a vision. We can solve problems. And we have this, subhanAllah, very unique part of our brain that helps us to be able to achieve the things that we want to. So I'm going to use a little and it's not really an analogy, but it's more like a example using this house, because I've seen a doctor called Dr. Dan Siegel uses this example of a house to explain the brain and just to simplify it for you. And you will not forget once you've learnt this in this way, once you hear me tell you about this way of explaining it, it just simplifies everything so much more. So I just want you to imagine the two parts of the brain that I talked about a couple of minutes ago, the upstairs and the downstairs brain, basically. So we're going to make the upstairs brain is the prefrontal cortex, which is the forehead to the front. The higher functioning, executive functioning part of our brain is the upstairs. And the downstairs brain basically is the limbic part with the amygdala. So that's the lower part. Now, how I want to explain this to you, sisters, is that the upper part of the brain basically is the upstairs of a house. So with the upstairs of a house, when you look out of the window from can you see the balcony on the left-hand side, and there's like the window, and as we look out the windows from the top part of the house, we get a really nice view of the world, and we can see what's going on from there, sitting at the top of the balcony. We can see what's going on outside. We get a really good full perspective of the world. So this part of the brain, the upper part of the brain, helps us with our higher thinking, planning, analyzing, solving problems. And it helps us to be able to understand ourselves better, understand other people better. We can have more focus and vision because we're at the top of the brain. Sorry, top of the house, sorry. Now, in this top part of the brain, you've got the brainstem, the limbic system, and the amygdala, yeah? Now, the lower part of the brain is, we've had this part all of our life. So the limbic part and the lower part of the brain, the downstairs part of the house, sorry, we've had this since the beginning. Now, this is responsible for breathing, blinking, heart beating, digestion, emotions, and survival responses. Now, in this downstairs part of the brain, we have all of the necessities for living. So, like if you look at the example of the house, you'd see we've got the kitchen, we've got a living room, got a washing machine in there, I think, and we've got all the things that we need. There's a bathroom downstairs as well. So we've got all of the functions to be able to live a life. Even if we didn't have the upstairs, even if we didn't go upstairs in the house, we could still manage to live downstairs, couldn't we? There's no living room downstairs. That's strange. But anyway, let's just say in a normal house, there's always all the basic functions for living are downstairs usually. And upstairs is where you go to maybe rest, and you go to maybe you might have a library or bookcase upstairs, or maybe you might be able to just want to look outside the view of the house, or maybe you want to go and sit in the balcony for a bit. This is the higher executive functioning part of your brain when you compare it to the house. Now, this is an important addition to the house is this alarm bell. So that alarm bell is a fire alarm that we've put in the hallway, that if there's any fire in anywhere in the house, we will have this there to protect us. And in the same way, in the brain, there's something called the amygdala that we talked about earlier on, which basically is there to ring an alarm whenever it thinks there's some threat of danger or anything that we should be worried about, to keep us safe, basically. In the same way, if you was to be toasting something in the kitchen, say your toaster's in the toaster and it burns, the alarm bell in the hallway will go off because it thinks there's a fire in the house, because that's the way it's been programmed, isn't it? Whenever it senses some smoke, the alarm bell will go off. And normally the upper part of the brain will come in. So basically, as long as there's like an integration between the upper brain and the lower brain, we will see, oh, look, it's only some toast, it's burnt, the house isn't on fire, it's okay, right? So then the alarm will turn off on it. So we'll go and get a piece of cloth and just like get rid of the smoke by the alarm will turn off. But there are times, sisters, when the amygdala, the alarm goes off, basically. So amygdala is activated, and it feels as though there's some sort of threat or danger. It could be maybe somebody said something to you rudely, maybe your husband said something to you, maybe your children are being disrespectful to you, or maybe you feel as though somebody's being rude to you outside, or someone's horned at you in the car, or something. It could be anything. When your amygdala senses there's some sort of a threat, the alarm will go off, and this is when you get triggered. Basically, that alarm is that trigger when you suddenly your body, something happens in your body. Maybe you might feel a tightness in your chest. Maybe suddenly you might jump. Maybe your heart might start racing. Maybe you might feel something like in your body somehow. Normally, my chest gets quite tight, and I can feel like a punch here in my chest when I get triggered. And the thing is, if you're not aware of these triggers, sometimes it can be very, very easy for us, and many of us do this, and I did this when I was younger as well. We react and based on that, we felt that trigger in our body, and we feel as though something must be wrong. So what we do is, say somebody said something to me that triggered me slightly. The first thing that I would do is I would start to go into this angry, reactive kind of mode, which is called a fight, flight, freeze mode, and I would just react based on what I felt in my body. In the same way, if, for example, the alarm near the hallway gets in the way of the staircase, what can happen? It can block the staircase, basically, because what we need to understand is when you come inside the house, you have to come through the hallway, don't you? This alarm bell can actually block the staircase, so now you don't have the free flow between the upstairs and the downstairs. I don't know if I'm making sense here, sisters, but if the amygdala, every message coming into our brain comes via the amygdala. It's almost as though the amygdala is the doorway into the brain. And if the amygdala thinks it's safe, it lets it in. But if the amygdala feels as though there's a real danger, we will experience this trigger, the fight, flight, freeze response. We will experience this. Now, so at times you can get so triggered that it's called an amygdala hijack. So it's almost as an alarm blocks the staircase, and now we're no longer able to get to the upper brain in order to be able to get the information or the problem solving or the rational thinking. We're not able to access that. And many people actually live their life in this way, getting triggered. The staircase closes down, so the upper brain closes down, and now we're only operating based on the downstairs part of the brain, if I'm making sense. So this is why it's very important for us to have integration between the lower brain and the upper brain. It's only when there's this free flow of information going from the upper brain to the lower brain that we can think rationally, we can live our life with more understanding. Because, sisters, this amygdala hijack, this alarm bell in our brain is very, very useful, because it will help us in difficulty and danger. For example, if you see a dog running after you, barking and running after you really, really fast, it's going to go for you, and your brain senses there's a danger. what will happen within seconds, your fight, flight, freeze response will kick in and you'll be able to run because your arms will get, all the blood will come in your arms and legs. All of the blood moves away from the digestive system into all of your muscles so that you can just run and you can get away from that dog. Or maybe if the dog gets too close, maybe it will come into your hands and arms so you could push the dog away and save yourself. So this sort of response, alhamdulillah, it's really, really useful and it's for our survival and it is important for us to have it. But the thing is, the question is, what we see as being threatening and scary and a danger to us, is it really threatening and scary and dangerous? Is our child's not getting up or not doing their homework something that's a danger to us? Is it a threat for us? Is our husband complaining about us not doing something for him, something that we really need to get triggered about? We may get triggered. But now the next question is, sisters, where does the information in the alarm come from? So how does the alarm know when it needs to get basically triggered? When does the alarm know that it needs to go off? When does the amygdala know that it needs to go off? Like, where's the information coming from? So the information is coming from downstairs in the basement. Now, you may ask, what is the basement? The basement is basically the subconscious mind. Remember, the amygdala and the limbic part of our brain holds many of our unprocessed fears. It holds on to memories from the past. It holds on to all of the things that basically it thought was a fear or a threat in our childhood. So because when we were in our childhood, between I think 0 to 3 years old, we were in a state of theta. It's like a state when your brain is highly receptive to whatever is going on, and it's constantly absorbing all of this information. Because when a child is born, it doesn't know what's scary, what's not scary, what's dangerous, what isn't dangerous. All of this is being saved. And then also after 3 till 7, and then even in through the teens, there's this. The brain is very, very highly receptive, and it can absorb a lot of information during that stage. So it's saving all of this information into the subconscious mind so that we can live our life and we can know what is safe, what isn't safe. And a lot of that's being absorbed from our surroundings. So in our house, in our family life, and when we're going out and about with our parents, and our parents are teaching us by us living with them what's okay and what's not okay, what's safe and what's unsafe. Now, the alarm sometimes can get a bit confused, basically. It can get confused. It can go off in situations which are quite safe. You're in a safe situation, but it might feel similar to something that happened in the past. It can make your body jump. It can make you feel scared. It can make you feel as though something bad's about to happen when really nothing bad is happening at all. Maybe it might remind you of something that happened in the past. So maybe if somebody yells at you in adult life, maybe your brain saved something in childhood when your mom yelled at you when you was younger and that frightened you as a baby. Now your subconscious mind is saved that when somebody yells, that is quite scary. So when someone yells at you in adult life, that part, the limbic part, your amygdala gets activated again and it causes you to feel triggered. So when you are triggered, your amygdala is reminding you of something from the past. So you hear or see an experience or something that reminds you of something from the past. So the alarm goes off, but it was nothing to worry about. It's just that it was something familiar and something that you'd remembered from the past. So the amygdala reacts based on the information that it's got, right? So now the next question is, how does this whole thing work, and how does it go, and how does the amygdala send messages to the body? How does it happen? How is this quick responses happening in our body? How does the brain send messages to different parts of our arms and legs and everywhere, and like how is this working anyway, and what's going on? So I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but just going to really touch on this a bit just for your information. And I don't think I'll do a very good job of explaining it anyway, but the central nervous system is our brain and our spinal cord. So that is what is called our central nervous system. There's brain and our spinal cord, and the brain is sending all these messages via these nerves thread-like nerves throughout our body. So they're coming from our brain onto our spinal cord, and then the smaller, thinner sort of thread-like nerves are going to our arms, legs, eyes, even our teeth and feet, and all over our body to our kidneys and different parts of our body. We all have these nerves in our body, and the nerves are communicating to the brain, and the brain is communicating to the nerves. So there's always a back and forth between the communication between the body and the brain. They are constantly communicating with one another. So with these nerves, they have a very sophisticated system of neurons. We've got about 100 billion neurons in our brain that are constantly communicating with the body, and the body is sending messages to the brain about what it senses and what it feels and what it sees, and the brain is also communicating with the body at the same time. So when you think something, or when you see something, or when your brain experiences something that might feel familiar to something that happened in the past, your limbic part of your brain simply sends a message to the nervous system that sends these signals all over the body. And we are sent signals in our body not just by these electrical sort of currents, basically, but also chemically as well. So it's electrical and chemical as well. So if, for example, you see something or experience something which is stressful or triggering for you, your brain will send signals to your adrenal glands to send chemical stress chemicals and stress hormones into your body to get you ready to fight, flight, or just deal with the situation because it's like an emergency. So I think I touched on that, and the reason why I wanted to explain that to you, so you understand how the communication is happening between the brain and the body and how it's all working together. Subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the human being with so much beauty and so perfectly, alhamdulillah. So now the next thing I wanted to share with you, sisters, is about the subconscious and the conscious mind. And the subconscious mind is, let's talk about the conscious mind first, since it's come. So the conscious mind is everything that you're aware of right now. Your thoughts, feelings, and actions. I'm talking to you, looking at a screen. You can hear my voice. Where you are now and what you're doing and saying, it's all going into the conscious mind. And all of this information in your conscious mind is coming from what you're seeing, what you're observing, what you're hearing. But the subconscious mind and the conscious mind also speak to one another. So then, as we mentioned earlier on, the subconscious mind basically is a big, powerful memory bank of all the memories that you've had since you've been a child. It stores your emotions, your feelings, your habits, relationship patterns, your bodily functions. So like your heart's beating, your lungs are working, your every part of your body is working, your food's being digested, all of that's being looked after by the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind doesn't even sleep at night as well. It stays awake to protect us because it needs to stay vigilant to keep us safe, basically. So in the night, if you ever hear a noise, have you noticed how you kind of wake up suddenly? How did you wake up? The subconscious mind causes the body to wake up because it's constantly communicating with the body. So the conscious mind teaches the subconscious mind, which can be programmed and controlled with effort. So the conscious mind is teaching, is inputting information about the world, about what's going on, it sees things when it hears things. And we can learn something with our conscious mind by constantly repeating that thing. So I want you to think about when you learned how to drive a car. When you learned how to drive a car, you had to maybe you had to have 30 driving lessons, maybe you had to have 40 driving lessons, and you had to keep repeating that, learning that skill again and again and again until you got really, really good at it. And then you got your own car, and then you started driving every single day. And now suddenly you're driving the car, but you're not paying any attention. Whereas when you were learning how to drive, you had to pay a lot of attention to how you were holding the steering wheel, when you changed the gear. You had to really consciously pay attention to looking at the mirrors. Do you remember that when the driving instructors used to keep reminding us to look in the mirrors, look in the mirrors? And you had to pay attention to every small little thing until it got passed down to the subconscious mind. So now you don't have to think about how you drive, what you do with your hands. You just sit in the car, and it's almost as though automatically you, start the car, and you may even be doing something else, listening to a podcast, or thinking about something completely unrelated to driving, but you manage to drive all the way to where you want to drive to without even having to think about it. This is exactly how the conscious and subconscious mind work. The conscious mind works on something again and again and again, and it's like inputting into the subconscious mind. So through repetition, when we keep repeating something or learning something or doing something again and again and again, it can create patterns that are passed down to the subconscious mind, and that includes any kind of pattern, not just driving a car or learning how to cook or anything like that. It's also thought patterns. When you think something again and again and again, repeatedly think a similar sort of thought pattern, that's passed down to the subconscious, because the brain is, subhanallah, is a very efficient machine. It thinks that, why do I need to keep paying so much attention if this thing is something that we will be repeating again and again and again, like driving a car, for example? Why don't we just make it easy for ourselves? It's a very sophisticated system. The brain says, let's do this. We're doing this again and again and again. It recognizes that it's happening again and again, so it says, okay, let's just make this into a pattern and send it down to the subconscious, so we don't have to think about it so much. So the brain wants to be efficient. It wants to conserve energy. It doesn't want to be paying attention all of the time to how to drive the car, or how to think this thought pattern, or how to, cook the food, or, the way, traveling in a certain direction. Even if you travel a certain direction again and again, for example, when I'm traveling to my parents' house, I don't really need to think about, which way I need to go, because I've done it so many times. The brain creates like a pattern for that, so it becomes easier for me. In exactly the same way, sisters, any pattern that you repeat again and again and again with your conscious mind is made into a pattern and passed to the subconscious mind, and then now it's just automatic for you. So it could be a thought pattern, it could be getting triggered, it could be getting angry, it could be words that you keep saying again and again. It could be like a pattern, like something like you brush your teeth in the morning, or what you do in the bathroom, or your routine that you have before you go to sleep, or maybe a gym routine when you go to the gym. What do you do there? Our brain wants to make it easier for us to do the things that we want to do again and again and again. Now, the thing here is, sisters, the brain doesn't know whether that thing that we're doing is helpful for us or if it's unhelpful for us. All it knows is that we're repeating this thing again and again and again. And if it's something we're repeating again and again, we should make it into a pattern. So the subconscious mind provides the conscious mind with information which gives meaning to the communication with the world. So not only is the conscious mind sending these patterns to the subconscious mind provides the conscious mind with our fears, with our worries, with the things that like we've dealt with before, and also our belief systems as well are in our subconscious as well. So say, for example, if I feel as though I'm not good at something, or if I feel as though deep down in my subconscious I have this deep feeling that I'm not good enough, or I'm not loved, or I'm not important, or I'm not special, those kind of patterns will be passed to the subconscious. And then when I speak and say things, it will be from that kind of place. So I hope I'm making sense, sisters, and I'm explaining this well. But basically, the thing that you need to know, if nothing else, is the subconscious mind is really, really powerful. Is so much more powerful than the conscious mind. 95% of our thoughts, behaviors, patterns, the way we do things comes from our subconscious mind. Subconscious mind is super powerful, and it really is the boss. It's what's in charge. It's the one running the show. Our conscious mind is only 5%. From what I've read in books by different experts, they say that 5% of anything that we learn and do and inculcate is by our conscious mind, and 95% of our life is being driven by our subconscious mind. So this is just a little bit of something that you might find really helpful. I think this is fascinating, subhanallah, this neuroplasticity and science on the brain. Every single time you learn something new, like when you learn to drive a car, I just want to elaborate on what I was saying earlier on. Each time you learn something new, your brain forms new connections, and the neurons make the existing neural pathways stronger or weaker. So, for example, say if I've had one driving lesson, or two driving lessons, three driving lessons, there's a very thread-like thin sort of neural pathway that the neurons will make together, because they're noticing this is the thing I'm doing again and again. So it starts to make a very thin sort of two neurons joined together. I won't go into how to explain it, but they have this sort of, they release this sort of chemicals and they join together. and they make, can you see like in the picture, like these really thin threads? Now what happens when I've done this driving lesson, for example, 30 times, 40 times, and I'm getting really good at it now, and I know what I'm doing, and now I've bought my own car, it's been a couple of months since I've been driving it, more threads will keep being joined on and joined on again and again until we have a very nice thick neural pathway. Now I know this thing, now I know how to do it. Now I don't need to basically think about how I do this thing, and I don't need to pay any attention either because my brain has saved this as a strong neural pathway. And this is the thing, is that our brain is able to create these kind of changes in our brain through a process called plasticity. So the thing is, if we keep repeating patterns again and again and again, our brain can save them and they can become very strong neural pathways. And in fact, the old patterns of the things that we did in the old way, our brain purges those overnight. So for example, if you stop doing something in a certain way, or if you stop doing something and now you move over to a new habit, the old patterns overnight when we sleep, our brain goes through this process of purging. So it's removing all of the neural pathways that aren't being used, because subhanAllah, again, the brain's very sophisticated, efficient system. It thinks if I don't need these neural pathways, we need to get rid of them. So it starts to get rid of the ones that aren't being used and strengthening the ones that are being used. So it could be anything. It could be something that you say, something that you do, some thought process, something that you keep doing again and again and again. The brain retains the neural pathways that are the strong ones. It gets rid of the weak ones. So subhanAllah, that's amazing, because it tells us that we are able to change our patterns. We're able to change the way that we do things. We're even able to change ourselves, even on a physical level. We can change our brain based on the way that we live our life. So the more you do something, the easier it gets. Even if it's a pattern that serves you, or if it's a pattern that doesn't serve you, if you keep doing that again and again and again, it will become easier for you to do that thing, inshallah. So just to repeat what I said, the repeated actions or thoughts create shortcuts in the brain, forming habits, and the brain has the ability to form new neural pathways, new neural connections, and change throughout our life. So you can rewire your brain by consistently practicing new thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The brain will keep changing until the end of our life. The more you learn and reflect, the more it will change. The other thing I want to point out here, sisters, is our prefrontal cortex, thinking part of our brain, and there's that emotional part of our brain. If we are emotionally led, there will be a neural pathway for that as well. So we will become stronger at thinking about things from an emotional perspective. So the blood flow will constantly go towards the limbic part of the brain, and we're doing things in that kind of style of emotionally charged kind of way of living our life. That also becomes a pattern. So when you're triggered, and how you use those triggers, that becomes a pattern. So your brain now thinks that, oh, hold on, there's some problem outside there. We're not safe. I need to get triggered very easily and quickly. So we need to make this into a pattern. So what happens is our sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system, they're just big words for the fight, flight, freeze response and the resting. So there's a fight, flight, freeze response, and there's a rest and digest stage, the way that our body works. If, for example, we're stressed out, we will go to this fight, flight, freeze response more. So it's like a dial. It's like, like your radiators, when you put the heat up to 20, 25, for example, the brain can make this thermostat, fix the thermostat at a higher kind of level. So now it keeps you in that fight, flight, freeze, that triggered kind of response, because it thinks that it's dangerous out there. We need to stay safe. And also it's become a bit of a pattern that it's saved. So the thermostat of your nervous system is raised now. So it's always in this kind of danger zone all of the time. It feels as though it's in this danger zone. But we can also turn the thermostat down so it's cooler, and we are feeling more safe in our body and in our mind as well. But these are all patterns that are created by consistently being repeated. Now, if these patterns are something that you've picked up in childhood and through your teens, and if your parents were quite stressed out and they were doing things in a certain way, just think about how strong those neural pathways will be in your brain. The neural pathways for stress, for anxiety, for feeling fearful, the ones about finances. How much sort of scarcity will you have about money if you heard your parents talking about money in a scarcity kind of way? What will your thoughts be around anger, How will you deal with stress? You know, maybe most likely the patterns will be the patterns that you took from your parents, isn't it? Because you've been living your life with them all of these years. So naturally, you would have taken on the same sort of neural pathways and same sort of thought process and same patterns that they had in their life. Something to reflect on there, sisters. The way you live your life, the way you think, the things that you believe, and the way that you do things isn't all basically something that you've done yourself. You are heavily influenced by your parents, by your childhood, by your formative experiences, and the people that you spend time with as well. So I just want to move on from the science bit now, and I just need to talk to you about three core emotional needs. Every child has these three core emotional needs. You had these and have these three core emotional needs. So at the very bottom, there's physiological needs. So you need to be healthy. My brain is calm. I can eat, sleep, and poop, right? Now, the very first emotional need is to feel safe. So I feel safe to go somewhere where I can be myself, I can feel protected. Someone will come and rescue me and look after me if I need it. So, the very first emotional need of a child is to feel safe. Did you feel safe in your parents' home in your childhood? Did you feel that you could go home and you could rest? Did you feel someone would come and save you? Or were you afraid of your parents in your childhood? What was it like growing up for you? Second question is love. A core emotional need that we have and our children have is to be loved. They need to know that, and we needed to know that even if we make mistakes, we will still be loved. That we're part of a family, that we fit in somewhere, that we're important, and that we are genuinely loved, not for what we do and what we give and what we produce and like how we look, but just deep down for who we are loved. So, did you have the feeling of that you were loved and that you belonged in childhood? And this is not to say that you knew on a rational level that you were loved. I mean, deep in your heart and your feelings and deeply, did you feel on a day-to-day basis that you're loved? How did you feel in your childhood? And the third core emotional need is esteem. So we needed to know that we are good at something, that we're respected by others, that we can say no to some things, and sometimes we can say yes to things. Sometimes we can say no to other people, and sometimes we can say yes to other people, and that we know that there are people who respect us and they care about our thoughts and our feelings as well. So those are the core emotional needs, and it's only when these core emotional needs are met that a child can really reach their self-actualized highest self. So at the top of the triangle, it says, I can express myself, my feelings, thoughts, and ideas about who I am on the inside. So this is the highest sort of, this is the person feeling as though that they are like complete. And this is the goal, that when we become adults, that if you've had all of these parts met for you, you can go in your life feeling quite competent in who you are. You don't need to compare yourself to anybody else. You don't need to try and fit in with anybody else. You don't need to copy other people or seek validation for them. You don't care about what other people think, not in a nasty kind of way, but you don't care about what other people think from a scarcity point of view or from a lack point of view. I mean, kindness is just something that's so important. But I mean, you don't care about what people think about who you are, what you're wearing, what you're doing with your life. You're more of a secure individual then. So the first thing is, sisters, is for yourself now in adulthood. If you couldn't relate to some of those things that I shared with you, and maybe you feel as though some of those core emotional needs were missing for you in childhood, you can start to create this safety in your life now. You can meet your core needs yourself now. You don't need to have your parents do that for you. You can meet your needs yourself. And you can start to do this. So first of all, the safety need. You can restore safety to your nervous system by working on breathing exercises, reciting zikr of Allah's name, recitation of the Quran can give us a feeling of safety. A salah as a meditative practice is absolutely transformational. It can give your nervous system and your body so much safety. Spending time with other people that we love, and that care about us and make us feel safe is so important. It's called co-regulation. So when we're with other people that make us feel safe, can give our nervous system and our body this feeling of safety, feeling supported and loved in our family and in our community. Exercising and strength training can also help our nervous system feel very safe and restore that feeling of safety inside ourselves. The feeling of love is the second core emotional need. And this is to love yourself, not just as an idea, but to feel loved in your heart. You need to start allowing yourself to feel the loving presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to not equate your worth with your productivity, to work on your relationships with yourself and your feelings. Stop ignoring your feelings. They were ignored in your childhood, but now in adulthood, you can give yourself what you needed then. Start paying attention to how you feel. Start to notice your feelings and thoughts. Noticing your feelings and thoughts and reacting to your feelings and thoughts are two completely different things. So you need to start feeling your feelings and have a compassionate sort of presence to your own feelings. So you need to hold space for your feelings. Allow yourself to feel what you feel from a place of self-compassion, not distracting and avoiding these emotions by scrolling on Instagram and just running away from everything you're feeling and brushing it under the carpet. This shows that the self-compassion and the love isn't there for yourself. Understand what you feel and be able to articulate what you feel in a way that's healthy for you. And to honor your body with health shows that you deeply love yourself. Self-love isn't just going and buying yourself hot chocolates and having coffees and shopping and having a facial, but it is so much more. It's about sitting with ourselves and allowing ourselves to feel these things, allowing ourselves to feel the loving presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to not equate our worth with anything, because subhanallah, all of us are special, unique, and all of us deserve to feel loved. And it's from that place of love that you can start to feel as like a secure individual. The third one is core emotional need is self-esteem. So what do you think of yourself and your relationship with yourself? So having boundaries, being able to say yes and no to other people, being able to say yes and no to yourself. So having discipline and commitment to the things that you said you're going to do develops a relationship with yourself. So finding your unique gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with is also a way to meet your core emotional needs of self-esteem. So meeting your emotional needs is something that we can learn to do. It will take us time. It takes, consistently practicing this thing and showing up for ourselves. And we can learn to meet these needs so that we can start living from the present, and we can start recreating creating our future, a beautiful future for ourselves. Until we learn to meet these needs, we will continue to live from the past and recreate it. We might not be living in the past, but the past is living inside ourselves on a day-to-day basis. We're constantly living our life from that subconscious program. But if we would like to override it and change the neural pathways and change the patterns that we have, we need to start consciously paying a little bit more attention. And I know that will feel difficult in the beginning, but when you've done something so many times, your conscious mind will pass it over to the subconscious, and it will take over, and it will feel natural and normal, and it'll feel so like you, and the old pattern will feel so distant and in the past. So sisters, I have created a course called Level Up Your Life. It's a 12-week program, and it's something that inshallah I will be offering in January for between roughly 6 sisters only will be on that program. And I'd like to take you or any other sisters who are interested through this journey of being able to level up your life and to be able to see what it feels like to be able to work on your childhood traumas, to feel your feelings, to grieve the past and accept where you are today, and build yourself up with safety, love, and esteem, inshallah. So if you are interested in working with me on this Level Up Your Life program, inshallah, please drop me a message, book in a discovery call. Let's have a little chat about how I can support you. I also work with sisters on a one-to-one basis, helping them heal from their past, from the childhood neglect, and also helping them to be able to create new patterns in their life so that they can live a more full and happier and joyful life and be able to support their children as well. So underneath the title, I wrote Heal, Grow, Transform, and Inspire. And I wrote inspire because once you've learned something, when you've healed yourself, when you've grown, you've transformed yourself, the next stage is to be able to teach your children these things. And it may not even be that you inspire them by talking about it. Your children will naturally, subconsciously absorb things from you just by being in your presence. It's like when someone's wearing perfume, we naturally can take some of that person's perfume just by sitting in the same room as that person, that the fragrance will come onto our clothes as well. In the same way, your children being in your presence are picking up habits and patterns and picking up your thought processes just by being with you. So when you level up in your life, you grow and transform, you will be inspiring your children, and you can teach them and share these things with them and be able to help and support them, because it's only when you can sit with your emotions and you can be able to feel that your own feelings and understand yourself, that you can understand another human being. If you've never understood yourself, you've never felt your feelings, you've never been able to sit with your own discomfort, how do we then sit with the discomfort of somebody else that we deeply, deeply love? And I feel this is so important for mums, particularly, to do this work, because our work is so important, not just for ourselves, but for our children as well. It's only when we're feeling good, when we're secure individuals, where our emotional needs are met, that we're then able to support and help and guide our children and give them the boundaries and the guidance and the love and the support and the nurturing they so desperately need from us. So, sisters, thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope you found value in this webinar, inshallah. And I hope and pray, inshallah, that I can speak to some of you soon in the future. But thank you so much for listening. And before I leave, I just wanted to share just a little bit of something with you. Just think about what life would feel like if you wouldn't get so triggered. If you didn't live in constant fear or threat, what would it feel like? What would it feel like? What would it look like for you to live a life where you're not living in constant fear? Just imagine the thermostat could be turned down and you wouldn't get triggered so much. You wouldn't get so angry. You could manage your emotions. You could deal with things from a more rational point of view, and you could train yourself to do that. I'm absolutely so passionate about supporting you to create a positive, lasting change in your life and to help you heal and break free from those old patterns from your childhood. So if you'd like to get in touch, sisters, set up a free 20-minute discovery call, and I'd love to speak with you and help you and see how I can support you, inshallah. And thank you so much for listening, sisters. Keep me in your du'as, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.